The first body was never found. On a humid July evening in 1893, in the shadowed streets of West Hollow, Pennsylvania, a young boy named Elias Merrick vanished without a sound. Locals whispered of a silent hand that prowled the town, yet no one dared speak too loudly. Fear had teeth in this place. 8 seconds was all it took. The sound of a splintering door, a strangled cry swallowed by the dense night air, and then nothing. Only a faint, coppery smell lingered, clinging to the cobblestones. Parents barricaded their windows, children stayed inside, and the town church locked its doors in an unholy solidarity. West Hollow was quaint, but marred by whispered stories of secret societies tied to seminaries and orphanages on its outskirts. One building, a crumbling stone structure once called the Merrick Orphanage, contained rooms no one ever entered except those who served its dark purpose. Generations of clergy, caretakers, and wealthy patrons moved through its halls and shadows, their smiles masking an insidious hunger. Inside, the air smelled of mildew, old paper, and faint metallic tang of rituals long suppressed. Children's toys were scattered, broken, as if abandoned amid faint scratches marred the wall, symbols no living soul could decipher. Some claimed these marks were warnings. Others said they were invitations. Beneath varnish, plaster, and lies, a darkness thrived, rituals that blurred the line between spiritual devotion and the perverse, echoing an ancient, almost Egyptian horror. Father Calloway was the first to notice the signs. The town's chapel, a towering Gothic structure, bore carvings unnoticed for decades, eyes etched in stone, staring into the congregants' souls. At night, the wind seemed to carry whispers from the pews themselves, half-forgotten hymns twisted into something obscene. Parishioners spoke of shadows moving independently, cold fingers brushing their necks during prayer. Beneath the chapel, a forgotten crypt held remnants of forbidden rites. In jars of amber liquid, strange organs floated, preserved with a precision no medical knowledge of the era could explain. Candles burned themselves down to the base, leaving only wax scars resembling human features. Father Calloway, consumed with guilt for serving the town blindly, began recording every anomaly in journals that smelled of rotten ink. The townsfolk ignored these horrors. Denial was survival. Children were taught to fear the ground they walked on, the air they breathed. Those who disappeared were never mourned properly. Their absence became a ritualized silence, a collective suppression of memory. The chapel's bell told not to call souls to worship, but to mark the passing of something far older and more malevolent, a system embedded in West Hollow's foundation, reaching back decades, feeding on the innocents that dared wander too close. Merrick Orphanage was the epicenter of the darkness. Abandoned wings held small beds, each with scratches and etchings of unknown symbols. Former caretakers spoke of children disappearing during playtime, their absence leaving only faint echoes of laughter. Food trays sometimes contained unrecognizable powders, yet children consumed them without protest. In the attic, maps of the town were overlaid with unholy geometry. Certain homes, streets, and intersections were circled in crimson ink, marked with dates and initials. These corresponded to each unexplained disappearance. Whispers claimed the orphanage's founders had studied ancient Egyptian texts, incorporating practices meant to transcend morality, merging ritualistic sexuality with spiritual control. Letters surfaced, shredded, hinting at ceremonies held under moonlight, where children and adults alike were forced to participate. The walls themselves seemed alive, absorbing screams and cries, storing them as if the building were a sentient vessel. Some nights, furniture would rearrange itself, shadows would congregate in hallways. Visitors who entered often emerged hollow, carrying the weight of secrets they could never articulate. A hidden chamber behind the library walls contained murals depicting grotesque scenes, entwined bodies beneath celestial formations, sacrifices blending the sacred and profane. The colors were vibrant yet decayed, as if painted in blood, yet some pigments defied chemical analysis. Elias Merrick's name appeared repeatedly, etched in the floorboards and alongside figures that bore Egyptian iconography, scarabs and serpents consuming their own tails. The room radiated a suffocating warmth, the air thick with the scent of incense and iron. Scholars who later examined it swore the images shifted subtly when unobserved, twisting into new configurations that implied motion and intent. Caretakers spoke in hushed tones of rituals meant to elevate the children, to mold them into conduits for forces beyond comprehension. Each rite demanded secrecy and submission. Those who resisted vanished, consumed, their existence erased from memory. The murals seemed to chronicle these acts, simultaneously horrifying and mesmerizing, a history of unspoken atrocities etched into plaster and shadow. Each month, townsfolk reported seeing figures moving through fog-choked streets, torches in hand, chanting in languages no one recognized. The procession began at the orphanage, winding through the chapel, and ending at the river, where offerings were submerged under moonlight. Children, dressed in ceremonial white, walked with hollow expressions, as if sleepwalking under invisible compulsion. Adults in robes followed, their faces obscured by masks of silver and black. Observers often vanished after witnessing these events, their absence replaced with denials, rumors, or tragic accidents. Father Calloway, desperate to intervene, attempted to break the procession. He was met with overwhelming force, psychic, emotional, almost spiritual. The air itself resisted him, thickening with dread and the sensation of countless eyes watching. He recorded his encounter in blood, etching warnings to any who might follow. The midnight procession was not simply ritual, it was control, a mechanism by which West Hollow enslaved minds and bodies alike, preserving a corrupt legacy that had festered for decades. The West Hollow Seminary trained clergy in the art of obedience. Its halls echoed with suppressed knowledge, texts combining theology, psychology, and forbidden Egyptian mysticism. Students were instructed not only in faith but in manipulation, ritual, and sexual domination as instruments of divine authority. Archives revealed the seminary's founders had corresponded with occult societies across Europe. Letters detailed experimental rites involving young orphans, attempts to awaken latent psychic abilities through trauma and ritualized sexual acts. Students were groomed from childhood to become caretakers of secrecy, inheritors of a legacy that thrived on obedience, fear, and repression. Rooms were sounds of suffering absorbed by thick walls. Some students reported hearing whispers from corridors that no one traversed, messages intended for ears sensitive enough to interpret them. The seminary was a crucible, forging men and women into living vessels of power and horror, teaching them to obey shadows, and to ensure the cycle continued beyond the awareness of common society. The town's wealthiest families, once patrons of the orphanage, participated in clandestine gatherings. They called these events the feast, though no food was served. Guests engaged in performances blending eroticism, ritual sacrifice, and recitations of ancient incantations. Elias Merrick's disappearance was celebrated annually, memorialized as a rite of passage into adulthood for the town's elite. The ceremony mirrored ancient Egyptian practices, blood offerings, sexualized rites of dominance, and symbolic rebirth. Observers noted the participants' faces remained calm, almost serene, despite the grotesque acts. The feast reinforced hierarchy and obedience. Children and young adults trained in the orphanage were brought forth, their wills tested and broken. Failure meant disappearance, erasure from history. Success meant complicity, a lifetime of guarding secrets that poisoned the soul. The town's corruption was not incidental, it was systematic, woven into education, religion, and family lineage. West Hollow had become a living temple to perversion and fear. The town's wealthiest families, once patrons of the orphanage, participated in clandestine gatherings. They called these events the feast, though no food was served. Guests engaged in performances blending eroticism, ritual sacrifice, and recitations of ancient incantations. Elias Merrick's disappearance was celebrated annually, memorialized as a rite of passage into adulthood for the town's elite. The ceremony mirrored ancient Egyptian practices, blood offerings, sexualized rites of dominance, and symbolic rebirth. Observers noted the participants' faces remained calm, almost serene, despite the grotesque acts. The feast reinforced hierarchy and obedience. Children and young adults trained in the orphanage were brought forth, their wills tested and broken. Failure meant disappearance, erasure from history. Success meant complicity, a lifetime of guarding secrets that poisoned the soul. The town's corruption was not incidental, it was systematic, woven into education, religion, and family lineage. West Hollow had become a living temple to perversion and fear. A retired librarian, Agnes Fairchild, came forward decades later with fragments of truth. She had catalogued books containing depictions of sexualized rituals tied to death and rebirth, some originating in ancient Egypt. Children were instructed to mimic gestures described in the texts, believed to channel divine forces or awaken latent power. Agnes recalled hearing chanting echo through the orphanage halls, rhythmic and hypnotic, guiding children into compliance. She confessed to aiding in these practices, coerced by fear of the seminary and its connections. The weight of memory had aged her prematurely. Nightmares consumed her sleep. Her journals, later discovered in a locked chest, described a systematic approach to controlling the town's youngest and most vulnerable. Every act, every disappearance, every ritual was meticulously documented. She wrote of a door that led to the vault, a place no child should enter, where the final rites were performed, a culmination of fear, obedience, and sexualized initiation into a secret no one outside West Hollow could comprehend. Beneath the orphanage, a stone door, engraved with serpentine symbols and Egyptian iconography, concealed the vault. Few who entered returned. Those who did spoke in whispers of flesh intertwined with shadow, of children kneeling in ritual, and of the air itself vibrating with malevolent purpose. Artifacts lined the walls, carved phalluses, depictions of sexual union with divine figures, and sacrificial instruments. The floor was worn from generations of ritualized movements. The vault's energy was oppressive. It warped perception, instilling visions of past and future atrocities simultaneously. It became clear West Hollow's corruption was not moral alone, but metaphysical. By merging sexuality, fear, and ritual, the town had created a living conduit to forces beyond understanding. Each disappearance, each act of complicity, reinforced this connection. Those who survived carried knowledge that fractured their minds, leaving them incapable of normal life, haunted by echoes of acts they could never fully process. West Hollow thrived in normalcy outwardly. Streets were clean, churches maintained, and children played in daylight. Yet beneath this facade complicity was absolute. Families trained their offspring in silence, instructing them never to question authority, never to leave the town unobserved, never to speak of what they had witnessed. This obedience was enforced, not merely socially but supernaturally. Children reported dreams of shadowed figures demanding secrecy, of whispers that guided hands and eyes. Those who resisted vanished. Some believed that the town itself was alive, a sentient force directing behavior to preserve its darkness. Even marriages, births, and deaths were orchestrated to maintain hierarchy. West Hollow's citizens became both victims and perpetrators, bound together by fear and tradition, sustaining a perverse legacy that blurred morality, legality, and divinity. The Susquehanna River, bordering West Hollow, became an instrument of purification and terror. Monthly, under moonlight, children and adults were guided into the river for cleansing rites, ceremonial and terrifying in precision. Floating symbols, candles, and markings on the riverbanks hinted at sacrifices and psychic manipulation. Participants spoke of visions of Egyptian deities Hathor, Set, Isis, interpreted as guiding the ritual. Failure to comply resulted in disappearances. Success guaranteed inclusion in the town's hidden elite. The river bore witness, absorbing sound, scent, and trauma, preserving the acts in ways unseen, yet tangible. Scholars today suggest such practices could influence generational psychology, embedding obedience and fear into the collective consciousness. Families tied to the orphanage and seminary ensured bloodlines remained unbroken. Arranged marriages and selective breeding were utilized to consolidate loyalty, obedience, and secret knowledge. Children were raised with implicit understanding: curiosity equals death. Those born with resistance were removed, often disappearing without trace. Their absence became legend, feeding the cycle of terror. Each generation internalized fear and secrecy, embedding the town's corruption deeper into human flesh, mind, and memory. In 1927, a team of independent historians and psychologists visited West Hollow. Initially skeptical, they encountered locked doors, hostile townsfolk, and the omnipresent sense of being observed. They found murals, journals, and ritual tools. Attempts to interview residents resulted in incoherent responses, sudden hysteria, or unexplained disappearances. One scholar claimed to have seen children moving in unnatural patterns, their eyes glazed as if possessed. The investigation ended abruptly. Reports were dismissed as delusion. West Hollow vanished from academic memory, yet its influence persisted in ways imperceptible, embedding fear, ritual, and sexualized trauma in an invisible web spanning decades. The chapel's choir, composed of young orphans, performed hymns that doubled as incantations. Notes resonated in specific frequencies, intended to manipulate emotion, fear, and sexual awareness. Observers noted that listening to these hymns caused nausea, disorientation, or compulsion. Some children reported seeing visions of Egyptian gods intertwined with clergy, guiding hands and bodies. The choir's music became a tool of psychological control, shaping perception and obedience in those exposed. In 1935, the last surviving elder of the seminary recorded a testament. He described the town's history as a continuum of horror, merging sexualized rituals with psychological control. He confessed complicity in disappearances, abuse, and manipulation, asserting that West Hollow's purpose was to maintain an invisible conduit to forces beyond morality. His words conveyed terror, regret, and awe simultaneously, portraying a town that had become a living temple of ancient horrors, where fear and obedience intertwined with desire and corruption. Adults who had survived the orphanage reported fragmented memories, visions of rituals, chanting, and sexualized acts. Nightmares persisted into adulthood, shaping relationships, cognition, and trust. Psychologists suggest these memories represent both trauma and the imprint of ritualized conditioning. Children were taught to merge fear with desire, obedience with pleasure, and secrecy with power, a psychological architecture of horror, designed to persist across generations. By 1940, attempts to document West Hollow's practices were systematically erased. Libraries reported missing archives, fires consumed documents, and witnesses died under mysterious circumstances. The town's secrets were preserved not in text but in the memories of the compliant, and in the suppressed trauma of survivors. Scholars outside the town dismissed rumors as folklore, yet traces persisted in fragmented diaries, unclaimed artifacts, and the whispers of the few who dared speak. The last recorded rite, 1947, involved the remaining seminary students and orphanage alumni. Participants described transcendence, possession, or total psychological collapse. Children born in that era carried the final imprint of West Hollow's practices. Adults who resisted vanished, while compliant members became carriers of the town's legacy, spreading it subtly into other communities through social, religious, and familial networks. West Hollow declined visibly, yet its corruption endured. Survivors carried ritualized trauma into other towns. Churches, orphanages, and seminaries across Pennsylvania exhibited echoes of these practices, a subtle, terrifying imprint of control, secrecy, and perversion. The town became a cautionary whisper in history, a place where morality was malleable, fear was law, and the human psyche became both tool and victim of unseen, ancient forces. Its influence lingered like a shadow, invisible yet undeniable today. West Hollow exists mostly in folklore, its streets silent, buildings crumbling. Yet, at night, whispers are reported, shadows move independently, and strange symbols appear on walls. Some researchers claim that the rituals, the sexualized indoctrination, and the psychic manipulation established in the late 19th and early 20th centuries created a pattern, an invisible architecture of horror that persists. Those who lived it never truly escaped, their memories etched into their children, the town, and perhaps the land itself. The story of West Hollow reminds us that evil can be ordinary, disguised behind the walls of faith, family, and civic pride. It endures not because of brutality alone, but because humans obey, forget, and hide truths they are never meant to confront. And somewhere, beneath the ruins, the vault waits its secrets, hungry for the next generation, its whispers beckoning those curious enough to listen.